Hello and welcome back to the channel, where it is time for the 10th and final episode of my PlayStation First Impression series. With us today, taking a look at a sports game in the form of International Superstar Soccer Deluxe. Obviously, most people will associate this game as a Super Nintendo title, where it saw release there towards the end of 1995. It's worth noting, though, it did get a PAL region exclusive release on the Mega Drive as well towards the end of 1996, and that the PlayStation release in February of 1997 is also a PAL exclusive.
International Superstar Soccer Deluxe.
So far in our PlayStation series, the real standout games have been Crash Bandicoot 2, Ridge Racer Type 4, and most recently Breath of Fire 4, with all of those performing pretty well in regards to their first impressions. So ISS Deluxe has got a real challenge if it wants to come out in top spot. Like always, I'll be playing the game for around 60 to 90 minutes before summarizing my initial thoughts on the way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it plays, and how much content and lifespan I think the game has, as well as whether it's a game I'm going to come back to and play more of, and ultimately then award it a final grade based on its first impressions.
It's USA Ball.
So once you hit the main menu, you'll see you've got quite a few choices here. You've got Open Game, which is your standard exhibition match. You've got Scenario, Short Tournament, Short League, International Mode, Penalty Kicks, Training, World Series, Loading Your Data, and of course Options. When you go into Options, you've got standard things here, changing the difficulty, changing the duration of a game. You can choose between mono or stereo sound. You've also got the Rules option, which will let you even turn fouls on or off, and select which referee you'd like to use. And you've also got the name edit mode if you really wanted to go through and change all of those funky ISS names to real life players. One thing I do like about the older ISS games is the unique player names. They are actually somewhat legendary now, in my opinion. So like always, I'm going to start with the visuals first, and when you go back and look at most old sports games, football/soccer ones in particular, they tend not to hold up very well from this era in terms of visuals, but this is where the fact that ISS Deluxe is a 2D sprite-based game actually benefits it. When it originally came out on the Super Nintendo, it was fairly unique in the fact that it had quite large detailed characters rather than having that more traditional, for that point in time anyway, top-down viewpoint. And as far as I'm concerned, it was the very best looking football game of the 16-bit era, and with the move over to the PlayStation, the game actually retains a tremendously unique graphical style because the large majority of other football games from this point in time had started to try and implement 3D visuals, with many of the earlier football games of this era having three-dimensional pictures and sprite-based players and genuinely not looking particularly good at all. If you can remember the likes of Olympic Soccer, Actua Soccer, all of these football games from that period of time, none of them looked very good. ISS Deluxe is an incredibly bright and colourful game that has got this really nice sort of World Cup USA 94 feel to it, and that's the first World Cup that I actually remember. The players all look suitably different from one another, and the animations within the game are also incredibly appealing too, whether it's the players shrugging when they get booked, or indeed the animations for when you shoulder barge or simply push an opposing player over. It is by no means a perfect looking game though, because the sprite-based intro that the 16-bit versions of the game had has been replaced by incredibly low quality full motion video, and it simply does not look as good. As well as this, some of the background screens on the menus are of pretty low quality, and there isn't really any excuse for this, with this being a 1997 PlayStation game.
Go! Nice shot! Scotland are on the score sheet.
Moving on to the sound effects and music next, and when this game first came out on the Super Nintendo, I have to admit, I thought it sounded absolutely brilliant in all areas. And even when it came out on the Mega Drive, whilst it didn't quite sound as good, it was still a very good sounding game there too. But unfortunately, the PlayStation version of the game really is mixed up, in all fairness. It's just not as good as those versions, and the big thing for me is the fact that the commentary has been completely redone from those versions, and whilst it's clearer, and there's more of it, the voices used here are simply not suitable whatsoever. In fact, I think they sound completely out of place and pretty dismal in all fairness. There is, however, a few decent musical tracks within the game, which is nice, but unfortunately, the PlayStation version of ISS Deluxe has less music in it than both the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo versions of the game as well. As for the sound effects within the matches, whilst they're not necessarily the most realistic by any stretch of the imagination, they do indeed have this nostalgic charm to them, and they fit the visual presentation of the game incredibly well. It's probably the strongest aspect, actually, when it comes to the PlayStation version of ISS Deluxe. But like I always do, I will end this part of the video by giving you some samples of the music within the game. So moving on to the gameplay next, and if you've played more recent games in the ISS and Pro Evolution Soccer series, then you will notice the roots for the way those games played in ISS Deluxe. You've got the same basic controls in the form of a low pass, a lobbed pass, shoot and sprint buttons, with the ability to also pull off through balls and 1-2s. You can also execute tactics whilst playing, so it does have a little bit of depth to it as well. One thing football games from the mid-90s though wouldn't necessarily give you is a realistic experience. Games from the early 90s had primarily been top-down playing games, and the early 3D football/soccer games from the mid-90s were not particularly good playing games on the whole. I find it very hard to believe that many people out there would say early soccer games in the PlayStation's lifespan, like Adidas Power Soccer, Actua Soccer, Striker 96, or even FIFA 96, were that good, let alone realistic. But thankfully, ISS Deluxe, in my opinion at least, plays vastly superior to any of these other games, with the key factor being that it is genuinely fun to play. You can score headers, bicycle kicks, and also put insane amounts of curve on the ball as well. And whilst it is in no way, shape or form particularly realistic, it is still a great experience even nowadays. If you are playing it for the first time now though, you may well struggle to go back to a soccer game where you can't automatically track players by simply holding the X or square buttons, as this was not a feature in the ISS games until several years later, meaning you have to try and time your block or sliding tackles much more effectively. Of course, if you are no good at tackling the opponents, you can simply press the triangle and circle buttons together and execute a shoulder barge or simply a direct push. Take into account though, you may well end up getting sent off for performing such actions. So moving on to content and lifespan next, and we have 36 international teams within the game, none of which have official player names, but there is an in-game editor should you wish to change them yourselves. You can also unlock all-star teams as well, utilize different formations with 16 available in total, along with 8 different strategies to go with them, and choose from an incredibly strong selection of modes of play as well. We've got standard exhibition style open matches, an international cup which bears a strong resemblance to the World Cup, a European Cup, a World Series which is a league mode featuring 48 teams, a penalty kick mode training, and of course my personal favorite, the scenario mode, where you're placed in specific match situations, usually not in your favor, with the challenge of trying to turn the games around and win them with a limited amount of time remaining. It's fair to say that in terms of different modes of play, ISS Deluxe performs very strongly, and indeed much stronger than many of the other football games from around this period in time. And the choice of 36 international teams was also a fair bit more than some of the older football games as well. Of course, there will be people that criticize the game for not having club teams and real player names, but for me, this isn't really much of an issue. It wasn't an issue when it came out. I actually liked the unique ISS player names, and I don't really see it as a major issue these days either.
Oh, good dummy.
So like always, that leaves me with my two final questions. Is ISS Deluxe on the PlayStation a game I'm going to play more of in the future? And what final grade is it going to get based on its first impressions? Now, obviously, I played a lot of ISS Deluxe on the Mega Drive and the SNES many years ago, and it's the kind of game that you can just come back to time and time again to have a few games and actually just enjoy yourself. So the likelihood is I will play more games of it on the PlayStation as well. Now, in terms of its final grade based on its first impressions, if I was looking at this in 1997, I may well have not been that impressed because it wasn't 3D. It didn't really strike as something new on the console. It was basically just a SNES game turning up a year and a half after the SNES version on the PlayStation, and this would have put some people off. But of course, looking back now, the first impressions that it gives are much stronger than many of the other football games from this point in time. It looks good, it holds up very well in all aspects, and it's still fun to play with a decent amount of content as well. So in terms of a final first impressions grade, ISS Deluxe is going to get a C+. That might not be quite as good as some people may have expected based on what I've said, but I still feel it's pretty good overall. Of course, the SNES version, I feel, is actually slightly better than the PlayStation version, and that's simply because of the things I've highlighted in the video. Now, up the screen, you can see the whole PlayStation First Impressions Seasons videos going up, with the real standout titles being Breath of Fire 4, Ridge Racer Type 4, and Crash Bandicoot 2, in my opinion, being the real standout title. That game was genuinely better than I actually thought it was going to be, and I have played it more since the video as well. But of course, these are just my thoughts on ISS Deluxe and all the other games that we've taken a look at in the PlayStation First Impressions series as well. So of course, let me know your thoughts on ISS Deluxe, whether you played it on the PlayStation. Like I said, it is incredibly rare now in the PAL region to pick this game up, or more likely on the Mega Drive, or even more likely on the Super Nintendo. And let me know your thoughts on ISS Deluxe down below, and perhaps any of the other games that I've covered in the series as well. And like always, I'll be back in the near future with some more videos. Goodbye for now.